Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with a couple of devotees. First, his water is contaminated. It's PT McNamara. How's it going, PT?
Skinny men are the most ridiculous thing there is. We've gone over this before. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
Really? You picked the quote about body shaming? That's good. Yep. I'm doing great. Thank you. Really excited to talk about this wacky movie. And he just wants his John McEnroe racket back. It's Antonio Alifano. How's it going, Antonio?
Her name is Rebecca King. I am 29 years old. I majored in literature and now work in the human resources department of a multinational company, but that's not important. I'm doing well.
But that's not important is really what makes it. It's great. Yeah. So listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Kinds of Kindness, the latest film from the director of Poor Things, Yorgos Lanthimos. So this is an anthology film. It's 3 stories in one. It's out in theaters now. It's these 3 dark tales about what some are willing to do to prove their love for others. I hope I'm getting that right. That's maybe me presuming my interpretation of the film. We'll get into it. The core cast reappears at each story. So it's like a sort of a group of players that sort of get recycled with each of the three installments. And many are Yorgos Lanthimos' regulars. Some of them are new faces. So, you know, the big names are Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Jesse Plemons, Margaret Qualley, Hong Chow, Joe Alwyn of Taylor Swift fame, I think is what most people I think would recognize his name from, and Mamoudou Athie. Hopefully that's correct. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film, and then with a very clear spoiler alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're not imposters or lost at sea after listening to this episode, what can they do?
After we get tested, if you don't want to miss new episodes when they drop, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us at all prominent podcast outlets: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, many more. Look for us and you should be able to find us. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Thanks, PT. So let's start with our short takes. And I don't think I've talked to either of you about this movie offline. So I'm really excited. What was your general reaction to Kinds of Kindness?
I'll start. I was never bored and watched each of these 3 stories with a lot of interest. But by the 3rd story, I remember sitting thinking, trying to remember the details of the first one. And while I found like there were connections to be made between the vignettes or whatever we want to call them, because this is an anthology film, you know, there are three separate stories. To me, it didn't feel greater than the sum of its parts. Now, I'm willing to be convinced that it is, and and that's part of the reason I'm here is actually to listen to this. So for me, it was really interesting scene by scene, but I wasn't sure it was saying anything particularly interesting at the end. It took me to kind of a strange new world, which is normally a good thing, but I felt like it kept trying to convince me that world was my world, and I wasn't quite sure I agreed. So PT, what was your take?
I mean, my very short take is I liked it, I think, more than anyone else associated with the podcast. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's like a masterpiece or anything, but I thought it was really good. I thought I had a unique take, but Jen had a similar reaction buried in our document, which is that this is Yorgos Lanthimos' French Dispatch. It's 3 short stories, loosely connected, but thematically resonant, leaning heavily into the director's established dramatic approach, worldview, and aesthetic. How much you can sink in and enjoy what's happening depends heavily on how much you already like this person's work. So I think that someone coming in and being like, yeah, Yorgos, okay, like I'll check this out. It, there's a greater than 50% chance you'll just be pushed away. But I think that if you have liked Lanthimos over time and not necessarily just recently, then this is something that you can really connect to. It's yeah, basically something I can easily see people being put off by, just as easily as I can see people enjoying it. But as a sicko, I dug the hell out of it, and it's been rattling around my brain. I keep thinking back to different like scenes and moments. So, uh, I'm pro. I'm definitely pro this movie. Jen, how about you? What did you think?
So my take is somewhat similar to Antonio. I want to say that I found the film overall fairly arresting, and my contextual Yorgos reference for this movie, I think, is the Lobster. I think out of the ones I've seen, I haven't seen all of his films, but out of the ones I've seen, it's closest to that one, in the sense that everything is like really like brutal and kind of unabashed in its darkness and violence and how twisted everything is and how like strange people behave in the stories, which in it, like Antonio was saying, in of itself is like draws you in. But for me, it was a high variance depending on which story it was. So I think number two in particular, it sort of started to lose me. And I was like, where are we going with this? Like, what is this all? I started to question sort of like how it would all hang together. And in the end, I kind of was like, okay, I'm a little bit back up, but still I don't think everything clicks into place in the way that you want an anthology film to. And that's kind of my main thing is like, I don't feel like the themes are there. Like if I poke around, I can find them, but I'm not sure how each of the three, like, I don't know how we justify the three stories necessarily being together and in this order, if that makes sense. But yeah, but like individual moments, I think, and like the acting, like Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone, absolute joy. Hong Chan, like the whole cast actually, like is like really delivering in a big way, and is like really unafraid to sort of inhabit the sort of Yorgos ethos.
I
But
don't want to
yeah,
over promise, but I do have, from reading around different reviews, I do have a potential answer that we has to wait for the spoiler
okay,
section. So for
yes.
audience members who wait, who watch, listen to this before, like you got to wait till after you watch it. But there may be an answer to why these three stories exist the way they do in the order they do.
But for people who haven't watched it, we've got the recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of a film, right? Because not every film is for everyone. I think PT's short take started to get towards this. I do feel like it's not if you're like, oh, I love The Favorite. Olivia Colman was lovely and so quirky in that movie, right? Like if that's kind of your entry point into Yorgos, this might be too much for you. It's sort of my main that is my kind of main recommendation algorithm point is that if like your favorite Yorgos films are the favorite, and even Poor Things, I would say, because Poor Things has a certain amount of whimsy to it, and this is like cold and harsh, right, by comparison. So yeah,
Yeah,
what
what I
does everyone
wrote
else think?
for the recommendation algorithm was, if you enjoyed The Favorite and Poor Things but kept thinking, man, I just wish this were weirder, darker, and showed more contempt for humanity, then I have great news for you. There's a movie out right now you can go and enjoy. But yeah, if you were like, those movies were an acceptable level of weird, this may end up being too weird and abrasive for you.
For me, for my recommendation algorithm, I said that if you're the kind of person who can binge Black Mirror, like you can watch like 3 episodes in a row of that. Like I like Black Mirror, but I have to do like one, and then I need to do something else. But if you could do
You need
three
a
in a
palate
row,
cleanser.
yeah, I need a palate cleanser. It's just it's too much, too dark. Like it's dark, surprising, but relentless, right? And so that's how I felt about this. The other thing that I'll say is like when I was watching it, I remember feeling like, oh, if this is the kind of movie that I would have dragged my family to, like growing up in like Texas, and then this is the movie that they would have been furious about, like, and they would point to every time it was my turn, they would be like, oh, like it better not be another kinds of kindness, which again, like I liked this more than I feel like than than maybe my initial impression sort of gave off. Like I did enjoy it moment to moment. And again, I'm really looking forward to talking about it. But as I kind of enjoyed sort of like figuring out how I was going to talk about it today and trying to like piece it together. But I feel like no matter what happens today, no matter what brilliant things like, you two tell me about the movie to sort of illuminate it for me, it doesn't make me like like it more, like it more in the moment, right? So, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe.
That's fair. I don't think, and I think this is the kind of movie where it generates a visceral, immediate reaction, and you're probably not going to get moved off of that reaction, even if there's some way of like, oh, I didn't like this, but I can start to appreciate more as people say it, or I did like it, but I also can see why there's people are arguing that this isn't all that great. You're going to stay at your home base, sort of where you were. The one addendum, I guess, to the algorithm that I'll say is, if you do know the sort of pre-Oscar time or pre-Oscar winning Yorgos Lanthimos, so before The Favorite, like Jen already mentioned, The Lobster, there was Killing of a Sacred Deer, and then his movies in Greek before The Lobster, specifically Dogtooth and Alps. This is back with Yorgos writing with his writing partner, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this very Greek name, Efthimis Filippou. I think is the pronunciation of it. So they co-wrote all those movies together, and they are back co-writing this movie, and it's sort of coming back to something that maybe we can dig into more later. But Yorgos, as one of the leading members of a cinematic movement called the Greek Weird Wave, which started in the early 2000s, but really picked up steam as the Greek economy fell apart. Before, and especially even more so in the financial collapse of like 2007, 2008, and that there were sort of a movement that made what was described in this one Collider article where I was looking it up as weird, morbid, and even gruesome films about sort of a detachment from reality, a growing instability of the world around you, and just the sort of corruption of power, and as things drift into authoritarianism, but like frequently in interpersonal dynamics instead of it being like an authoritarian society. It's like authoritarian interpersonal relationships. So it's back on all that. Like that stuff was all felt still present in the Tony McNamara penned movies, Favorite and Poor Things, but he's back in that like pretty firmly. So if you are someone, and then this may be a very dwindling number of potential people who are just like, I miss the old Yorgos, good news. This is more like old Yorgos.
The one last reference I'll throw in probably is like, if you like something that is somewhat absurdist and also very cruel, sort of like Rick and Morty, I want to say, or like something, you know what I mean? Like something like that where it is almost like nihilistic in its approach. I feel like there's maybe some, because I'm trying to think of like, if someone doesn't even know who Yorgos Lanthimos is, like like who of those people are we recommending this movie to? And I would say like, yeah, if you can handle lots of graphic content, explicit content, and you want some sort of like social commentary, allegory, almost like you're watching a like Waiting for Godot or something like that. Like it has a little bit of that in it too. So also, Rick and Morty meets Waiting for Godot. I guess that's my pitch.
But directed by David Lynch.
Yes, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we've scared off everyone now. So let's go into spoiler mode. If you have not seen Kinds of Kindness and you do not want it spoiled, please go see it. I mean, maybe we've piqued your sense of morbid curiosity. Go see it. Come back, rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. Mentioned that number 2 was like my least favorite. What I want to hear your rankings. Like, did some of these work much better than others for you? Do you have a quick ranking for the 3 stories?
I actually liked. I went 1, 2, 3. So I liked the first one probably the best, and then I know what you're talking about with the second one. So it's I like this one a lot more than the second and the third one, I guess. Um, but I'd go one, two, three. Um, they got a little bit worse for me
Yeah, and
as it went along.
I've heard that from other critics too, that it like peaks too early and then gets steadily worse over time. So you're not alone in that at all.
That felt like
what
the
you-
predominant Letterboxd review response was like, I wish the first one was just a short movie. Like the first one was expanded a little bit and it was just a short 80-minute movie, and then the other two just didn't exist or were sat on for a while longer. So I'll buck that a little bit. I like the third one the most. And then it's 3-1-2 for me. I have stuff positive to say about the second one. I think maybe the biggest laughs that I had, which is again full sicko mode.
That says a lot about you.
I had some big laughs in the second one, but I think that one held together the least out of all of them. But I did like the third one quite a bit, and I think we can talk about that more.
Was it the self-mutilation and cannibalism that got you really going? What?
I mean, look, do we want to get into the two biggest, my two biggest laughs? It was the everything around the sex tape, which is,
that is super awkward and very funny. Yeah,
pretty choreographed. Like once he was like, I want to go watch the tape. It was like, well, this is going to be something terrible. But like it was like, even though like you kind of know what they're gonna cut to, like it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. And the reaction of the people watching it in the movie was perfect. So that was great. And then I'm going to lose both of you, and that's fine. The other thing is, for those of you who may be listening that were not didn't listen to our spoiler mode warning, in the second story, one of the big monologues is this character who has come back from having survived a shipwreck and lived on a desert island. And she has this monologue talking about how while she was on this island, she had a dream that she was living in a society where dogs were the dominant species and humans were the subservient pets. And it's interesting. And there's something about, again, sort of dominance and submission and power and control within that and what we expect of each other, blah, blah, blah. And maybe the biggest possible criticism I have of it is that there's a lot of hinting at stuff like that without it all necessarily being clear and making sense. But at the very end of that sequence, as the credits are rolling in part 2, we get these black and white snippets of what presumably were her dream about this. And it includes dogs in an office and like a dog waiting in like a doctor's waiting room. And then there's a human roadkill, which I thought was funny. That's kind of funny. And then like the fourth or fifth one they cut to is a dog that's committed suicide by hanging himself in a garage. And I was the only person in the theater who laughed at that, but I thought that was really funny. I thought that was hilarious. That like, if you had a dream of like, what would it be like if dogs ran society? It's like, well, one of them would get sad and kill himself. Like that has to be like one of the first 5 things that would happen. So I think that speaks to the movie, and I guess to a degree also my own ability to think about how society immediately gets so bad that some people need to kill themselves or think they should kill themselves.
I think the dogs driving in the car was the Palm Dog Mutt moment.
I think that may be right.
It got a shout out from the Palm Dog Award.
What was your order, Jen?
Yeah, that's dark. So I also laughed a lot when they started showing the dogs, and I'm like, oh, they're actually showing what she was talking about. Like that in of itself, I think the noose dog was going too far because I just love dogs too much, and I'm just like, no, let's not do that. So then I stopped laughing. I was like, wait a minute, no. But yeah, with that second one, and I feel like I'm gonna trot out bad takes that I had from when I saw the TV Glow, but like I just needed a clearer signal about like, okay, was that a dream she had? Did that actually happen in this island she went to? Did she actually kill her? Like, was she actually being impersonated by some other alien that killed themselves? And then she could come back at the end. Like the ending of that second one to me is super confusing, where like they just embrace and they're like, yay, we did it. And then the other like doppelganger, Emma Stone, is like just lying on the chair bleeding out. So like And I was just like, wait, what? Like, so who was right? Like, that was the thing, is like, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was cogent enough. Like I needed just like 2% more, Yorgos, just 2% more direction.
And again, I think this is a fair thing to get stopped by in terms of enjoying the movie, is that it's not clear. I think that it can be interpreted as like what you saw is what you saw. Something is out there, some power that is connected to our connective tissue guy, RMF, because RMF is the guy who flew in the doppelganger, if this is a doppelganger, and said like, oh, we found this person here, that this is some sort of insidious thing that's being put into the world, and our boy Jesse Plemons figured it out. Or it could be that Jesse Plemons is being delusional. There is, what is the phrase for it? I found this when looking around, Capgras delusion, or Capgras syndrome, a psychiatric disorder in which a person holds a delusion that a friend, spouse, parent, another close family member, or pet has been replaced by an identical imposter. It's a real psychological thing. So like, it could be that he's just an abusive guy who's he has like multiple times that we see him separate from Emma Stone on the job with other characters looking at him, and he does something absolutely crazy. Like he's stroking the face of someone and he's shooting off someone's hand. So he might just be someone who is unhinged and has this belief of like, this person is doing this thing. And like his perception of it is that he tells Emma Stone to like chop off your thumb and cook it. Maybe that's something he's doing to her when he's abusing her. So it's open.
Right, because they show her going to a doctor, and the doctor's like, you can tell me if something is happening, if you're being abused. And it almost seems, my interpretation in that moment was like, and then I want Antonio to jump in with what he thought, but like, it almost seemed like she was doing that as like a setup to like, so that he would get in trouble, or at least in the moment, that's what I thought might be happening. But here's my thing, is that I think your interpretation of because all these three stories are morality tales, right? Like, and I feel like the moral, or kind of the commentary, radically shifts depending on whether or not Jesse Plemons is in the right or the wrong in terms of his delusion. Like if he's delusional, you interpret it one way and you judge him one way, but then if he's right, and it's like a weird sci-fi thing where like he figured out how to overcome the alien trap that he was in and got his real wife back, that's a totally different story. So I don't know, Antonio, what do you think?
Part of what I thought in terms of like what links the three parts together, right? Part of what I thought was sort of interesting was that they are sort of like, they all deal with sort of morality, but not in the way that you think that they're going to, right? Like there are certain expectations based on the way on the way that the characters are sort of framed, that you expect stories to go a particular way, right? And so in the first one, you expect like Jesse Plemons made the like moral choice, the right choice not to like run into the person, but then at the end ends up sort of like following through anyway in a really savage way, but doesn't get punished for it. He's accepted back, and things are great. Um, so here, I didn't quite understand. I was expecting something to what you expect when Jesse Plemons is revealed as kind of like a monster, right? Like doing these things to, even if it is a doppelganger or whatever, right? Like I was like that's still not okay, right? Like whatever the insidious agenda is, like I'm not sure that it can be more insidious than like what's happening right now. Um, but but at least with the first one and the third one, I could I could I could sort of understand what was ultimately being said based on how it sort of subverted our expectations. The second one, I still don't get it, right? Like, so I'm just most confused by the second one, but also um, the most sort of frustrated with the second one because it's like really brutal to like watch those scenes. It's not a fun thing to watch. And while I admit I like those moments are pretty funny, like the interlude, the dog interlude was funny, but also seemed like it's not like integral to like the of the story, and so it felt like a fine flourish, but it didn't make the story the before it like click together any better. And but the foursome scene and like that stuff, that was like the closest that I probably came to like laughing. I probably smiled, but I don't think I laughed at that particular moment. Um, but, um but the ending was just that was just really puzzling to me, and that's why and I'm glad that I guess I'm glad that we're starting there because I didn't know quite what to do with it other um than again, it subverts our expectations because at the end, he's sort of vindicated, right? Like, he was right. Like, the monster was right all along, right? But even within the sort of logistics of, like, that world, I still don't know quite what to do with it, what the thing is that's inside, and if it did have a sort of, like, insidious agenda, why it was continuing, why it basically, like, destroyed itself to, like, to what end was, my question. So, kick it to you, PT. Tell us the answer.
Yeah, illuminate us.
Well, I definitely don't have an answer.
Yeah.
But I will say I think I maybe had a different reaction because I
Okay.
just didn't in the moment wasn't like, well, this is really happening. Like that this is there is a doppelganger. I took it as more this is Jesse Plemons character twisting the reality or we're seeing his perception of it. So I was more connected to that interpretation by the end. I was with you, Jen, when uh, and I feel bad I don't know these characters' names, especially. It's always a problem that I refer to people by the actor's name instead of the characters after seeing a movie. But when it's three different characters' names across
Sure.
the course of a movie,
Yeah.
forget it. So yeah, when Emma Stone went to the doctor, it was like, I think there was evidence of potentially being abused. I was like, oh, this is a setup. But then by the time we got to the end, I was like, oh, he's doing this. Like he has set all this up, and this is sort of in his mind. And I left with sort of thinking how each of the stories is about power. I mean, they're all about power. I think that's probably pretty clear, but a different source of power. With the first one being a sort of corporate capitalist boss power, the second one being police, and that it was very important that he was a cop who was doing this, and stories and statistics about the number of abusive partners who are also in the police force and how their stories are generally believed and such are there. And then the third one being religious. So that was my initial take on it. I do have an external one that seems it's kind of relevant to something that may come up in the rhetorical situation. So we'll circle back. We'll circle back to another sort of connective tissue thing.
In the second story, Jesse Plemons is Daniel, and Emma Stone is Liz.
Got it.
Which once
Jen, we
Thank you.
knew that 2 was your least favorite, but what did you give us your rankings for the 1 and 2?
Oh, I didn't. So thank you. I got too carried away talking about number 2 that we got off track. But yeah, I would go 1, 3, 2. So I actually liked the third one quite a bit, mostly because of the cult factor, and I just thought that the way that they set up the cult was very convincing and very in a way that kept me interested, where I just wanted to know more about. I'm like, wait, what? Like, how? Why are they in this like deathly sauna? Like, what is happening? and what is this water that they keep drinking? And like, you know what I mean? Like, so there was enough intrigue for me. And then like also it probably tapped into sort of my, preference for supernatural stories, because I think out of the 3, the third one is kind of the most has the potential to be the most supernatural, because they're searching for this sort of like, Messiah figure who can bring people back from the dead. They're actually testing whether or not people can bring them back, bring other people back from the dead. And so for me, like that, like, and it actually had a little bit more of a built-in. The plot had more intrinsic mystery to it in a way that kind of kept me on the hook, even if stuff that was happening seemed totally crazy and I was like, it's fine. I don't know what's going on with that, but it's fine. You know what I mean? Like that was easier because the plot was there. It was easier for me to kind of stay with it. That especially in the compared to number 2. Number 1 was my favorite just because I feel like it's the most accessible. Like I could probably explain to you what that one's about the most. and it also is kind of like in a lot of ways the closest to our own reality, and therefore to me the weirdness, like, you know what I mean, because like the Jesse Plemons character, who I believe is Robert, and the Willem Dafoe character Raymond, like the setup is very much like kind of like a Mad Men, like office drama, everyday life. Like, and he has kind of like the perfect suburban life with the Hong Chow character, who I think is Sarah. And then so the way in which it's twisted feels that much more potent because the world that has been set up in the story is a little bit closer to our own than the other two. And there was just like a weird dystopian kind of like consistency to it that I really liked. And especially when he's like sees is it Rita is Emma Stone's character. I have the Wikipedia page open, so I shouldn't act like I'm trying to remember that. I'm not a fraud. I just caught myself doing that, and I'm like, no, I have it open. And, well, to be fair, it's not like a clean list. I have to search for the names in like the story description. So there's a little bit.
If you go down to cast, there is a list.
Oh, there is. Okay, I'll just do that then. There we go. Anyway, so especially when he sees the pattern repeating with Rita, like I thought that was really fun. In a way of like he becomes jealous and like all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so I don't know. That's
it was also fun because like, you know, not that like, oh, it subverted my expectations, and that's inherently a good storytelling experience, but it was I did like that's the rhythms of him realizing of like she got the same book, she has all these things, like everything that's happening, you know, she's getting the same notes. And she has this nice house now. That like it felt like, oh, he's gonna like work to expose the Raymond to her, or like try to drive a wedge in between them. But instead, it's like, nope, I'm gonna double down on killing this guy because she didn't complete the job, and if I do it, I'll be back in Raymond's good graces. Raymond and Margaret Qualley's character, Vivian, he can go back to lying down with them.
It's interesting that I agree that 1 is the most accessible. Um, it's still really twisted, right? Like, I mean,
it is, yes.
it involves someone like giving someone like morning after pill, like like their spouse, like pills to like, um, make sure that they don't have children, you know, and then the last scene where he runs over RMF's head, I think twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was brutal, but it did feel like it all but it's all very grounded in Jesse Plemons's performance. And after watching that first one, I understood like, oh, this is why he won Best Actor at Cannes. Is like is and I if nothing else, sort of looking forward to seeing like what he was going to do in the next one and how his character was going to differ. But I thought even just his performance there, um, it really helped to sort of carry that story uh, as far as it went, I think. So to me, it's the most complete, the most polished, um, and uh, it still has its moments of humor too. But yeah, so
I really liked the idea that like, because yes, as PT has mentioned, actually all of us probably have mentioned by now, that it's about power, control, really sinister acts masked as kindness, like that. I feel like those are the big overarching themes of the whole film. But for this one, there's a very specific flavor of this idea of power control because Robert thinks that he wants freedom, right? Where he's like, oh, like this is so oppressive. I really wish I could like eat whatever I wanted or what. But then once he's cut loose from Raymond, he has no idea what to do with himself, right? So it's like this really interesting calling out of like people yearn to be free. We're always talking about freedom, but at the same time, there's a comfort in being controlled and having things decided for you. Right? Because the most painful scene in that one is when he's sitting at the bar trying to order a drink. And he's just fumbling through the whole thing. And he's like, well, what do you think? Like, why don't you just clear the bartender just says a random thing and is like, how about a blah, blah, blah white wine from New Zealand or something? He's like, great. Like, he doesn't even care. So yeah. And then he just yearned to get back into the system of control. Right. And I just thought that was a really, because it wasn't indicting the control system. Right. It was like, no, we are implicit in our own oppression, kind of, in a lot of ways, which I thought was really interesting.
Big Loki speech in the first Avengers movie of "You all want to be on your knees."
Yes.
That we want to succumb to some big, authority figure who will tell us what's right, what's wrong, and what we should do.
Jen, since you mentioned the bartender scene, I have to ask you because this was something that I noticed in that scene, and then and then a recurring thing happened in the second one, but I can't remember if it happened in the third one too. But the bartender spoke with like this really flat sort of like affect, and and it was just like so noticeable to me that I was like, well, that has to be intentional. And then in the second scene, I don't know if it was the same actor playing like a sheriff in the police station, but also had the same sort of like flat affect, where it was almost just like someone reading a script, right? Like without trying to imbue it with like a character or whatever. Um, and I don't remember if it was an equivalent in the third. Um, but I mean, it involves a cult, so like maybe someone in the cult had the same sort of thing. But but
I would say Jesse Plemons has that the whole movie.
oh maybe.
Just,
Oh well, maybe.
and I think
Certainly in the third one.
I've heard multiple critics say that his acting style, his kind of deadpan delivery that he does in so many other roles, is like perfectly suited for the Yorgos verse. Because it's because it's exactly what you're describing, where it's so flat intentionally.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. I mean, I thought so. This was that shoots my interpretation to what I was about to. But here, I'll just say what I was going to say about like because the characters were always sort of like like very small supporting characters, right? And for me, these sort of bit characters talking with this flat affect maybe was sort of this presentation of just like normal people presented as sort of like sheep without agency, without ambition, and but again, I was looking for that third link, and I couldn't figure out if there was a third one. But also, am I crazy or maybe I'm being gaslit now? But like, were there? Did you notice the line reading? Was that a noticeable thing for you two? Okay. Okay, good. At least
That is very in line with the aforementioned sort of earlier Yorgos, like pre
all right. All
the
right.
favorite. That was one. I mean, and I think it's even in the favorite and Poor Things. We listeners are invited to go back and listen to our episode on Poor Things, where I spent probably too much time talking about Brechtian drama and the distancing effect, and how a lot of the presentation is designed to sort of play into this tradition of we want to sort of remove performance on some levels in order to highlight the ideas of what's being presented instead of just sort of sink into empathy, which was to just sort of reiterate the distance between the performers and the audience to try to underscore what's happening and the disconnect within our actual real world. So that's was there in Poor Things, but it's really there in Dogtooth and The Lobster, which are the two earlier Yorgos movies that I've seen, where basically all the characters are acting that way, even the big celebrities in The Lobster. So yeah, again, and that also ties it in my mind to sort of that Lynchian thing. And not to be the film bro that always brings up Kubrick, but it's also has that Kubrickian vibe of just like people talking, but like having such a stilted presentation that it emphasizes the disconnect. But it's also off-putting, and it's totally fair, I think, for people in the audience to be like, this sucks. And I want to see actors who are trying instead of someone who looks like they got a cue card 5 seconds ago.
Well,
I
no,
mean, you were making the comp to Wes Anderson earlier, that this is Yorgos. There's a little bit of that. I mean, obviously the draping is very different.
Greg isn't even here to defend his boy.
I'm sorry.
And we're taking shots at Wes.
But that's the humor, at least because what made me think of that was like, well, partly that flat line delivery is what makes me laugh a lot of the time.
Yes.
Even though it's horrible. You know what I mean? Like, that's what makes it still funny, is because they're kind of saying it like it's not a big deal. But, you know, if I think about watching Wes Anderson, a lot of his very funny characters have the same thing, where they just have this sort of like very dry, monotone delivery, and then it's really funny because they're just kind of saying things as plainly as possible, even though it's like wild, right? That what's happening. So yeah, I think it's definitely a really interesting choice, and yeah, the mileage will vary for everybody in terms of whether or not it works for them. I think to go back to like the themes of this movie, I think anytime you encounter characters that are really leaning into that tone, I think it makes everything feel a lot more mechanistic, where it's like we are just all cogs in the same machine. But I think it also removes a lot of the humanity, right? So like people aren't getting emotional about things. It's just the way it is, kind of, I think is part of the implication, which makes it more sinister, I think, in a lot of ways.
Everyone feeling disconnected and also feeling like they can't change that disconnect is important for authoritarian control.
Shall we move to talking about the third story?
Yeah. PT, you go first.
Sure. I liked this one. I thought it was great. It was my favorite. Let me think. What was it? There was something that you said earlier, Jen, that I remember wanting to sort of follow up on. I agree with you about sort of how they built out the rules of this cult, and like the things they were doing, we were like, okay, this means something, but I don't know what it means necessarily. The way with the water and the sort of timing of things, and I did really like that, and I super liked that it was that they were looking for, as you described it, as like a messiah figure. You're looking for the sort of miracle worker who can do stuff, but their like entire plan with it was, okay, we're going to find this person and then trap them forever on a boat so they cannot leave, and make them a prisoner who does work for us, and then we'll benefit from that, which was felt very perfect in terms of like, if you had access to some way to do something miraculous and wonderful, it's going to immediately be corrupted in any sort of a institutionalized system, whether that's a company or religion, a government, whatever, into how can we like control it and profit from it. So yeah, everything about the boat I thought was lovely. The way that Emma Stone starts trying to like pitch the boat to the veterinarian once she realizes it's just like, you're gonna love the boat, like the bedroom's so nice. I thought that was great, and I loved then the very Coen Brothers-y ending of like getting to the end of the credits and then like just a little bit afterwards of like, oh, and it all fell apart because this person's hubris led to her killing the only thing that could stop everyone from dying. The end.
Yeah, and the way that I found the ending of the second one confusing and not satisfying, this one felt to me, it felt satisfying as a moral tale because it was sort of like she got what she deserves, right? In the sense of like, oh, of course, like you're trying to kidnap this person, and then of course the one thing you want from them you now can't have because you were being careless or caring too much about the water. That's the thing, is that she's like, oh, I'm gonna get you some water, and that's what causes her to get into the car accident. Mm-hmm. Although I do have to say that I was, up until that point, very distracted by the car and her poor and reckless driving, and then I was like, oh, it all makes sense now. So was it worth it for me to be like, wait, what's the deal with this car? Like, why does she have this like crazy, I don't even know, I'm not a car person, so I don't know what it's like a purple like Dodge Challenger or something like that. Like it's like
it's a Charger or a Mustang.
Okay,
I think, but I'm also not a car
and she's
person.
like really like speed deming, not driving safely. So yeah. So at first I was like, this seems weirdly inconsistent with her character, kind of, or like, what is the deal with this? And then at the end, I was like, oh, okay, it was for this ending. This makes sense.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the ending because, like, we've pointed out the commonalities between the three. Um, so what my expectation was that because the first and second sort of ended on kind of happy endings for like the kind of awful central characters, this one did not, right? Like, so this sort of broke that trend. Um, so um, so I don't know what to make of that. That the parallels sort of end here. I mean, on the one hand, she was an awful person, but she also suffered,
Mhm.
it was awful to watch the rape scene, um, in the house, and so from even though, she was doing sort of awful things, like, her devotion to the cult and stuff, like, she was sympathetic also for other reasons as well, like, this is the one Emma Stone character in the 3 that you given, like, permission to sort of, like, empathize with and that you really feel for, um, and so this one does feel like a more sort of kind of like I don't know if I can say traditional morality tale, but it ends the way that you sort of expect it to end based on, the way that we've taken, like, storytelling for our entire lives. Um, so given that it bucks the trends of the first 2, what is that saying? I don't have an answer to this, and I was hoping that maybe you 2
I
did.
think you could definitely do a gendered reading of it, right? Because
Okay.
the first 2 end with Jesse Plemons getting away with something,
Okay.
and the third one is Emma Stone not getting away with something. And I think a lot of that third story, her rejection from the cult, and her story feels very gendered because of what happened, the way in which her water became contaminated, right? And how
Yeah.
like no one cares at all what happened to her, right? It
Mhm.
it only matters that it's her fault that she allowed this to happen, kind of. Like that's the impression you get from the 2 cult leaders, is like they have no sympathy for her being a victim at all. They're just kind of like, well, like maybe you shouldn't have gone there, or like maybe this is your fault. Like they
Yeah.
try to victim blame a little bit, and
Yeah.
A lot bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, I shouldn't say a little bit. It's a lot. They're just like, yeah, too bad. Like, so sorry.
Rules are
You're out.
rules.
You're out. Um,
With
and
regard
yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So I feel like there's something there. If we're establishing a pattern.
The other thing I'll say, in addition to that, I think the gendered component is certainly there. Is that the comeuppance part? You could argue isn't part of the story, because the credits roll while she's dancing. She's dancing in celebration because she's found the thing that she wanted to do. She won the quest to go and find this person. And they roll the credits the way they rolled for the other sequences, and it cuts to black, and then it comes back up with her driving out of the parking lot, and it's like an epilogue where this thing happens. So in a way, is it implying that these are just the stories, and the stories are told, the parables end, and then we have a message that's all it would be terrible, like all these people doing bad things, not exclusively, but frequently doing bad things, get what they were looking for, get their victory, but then maybe after the parable's over, in reality, there could be more, there could be another comeuppance.
one. Okay.
And then our boy gets to eat a sandwich. Don't forget that. I don't know if you guys waited to see that.
I don't think I did. What
Oh, is that
was
mid
it?
after the
mid
credits?
mid credits, RMF eats a
Mm,
sandwich. That's why the
I was
third
out.
part is called that. He's just sitting
Ah,
outside a burger stand eating a burger, and he spills ketchup on his shirt, so you can
That makes
see
sense. I
his,
did walk out of the theater being like, wait, wasn't there supposed to be a sandwich?
yeah, because he's
Oh,
alive, and he's wearing his shirt, but he still has all the bruises across his face from being run over, and he's enjoying a burger,
oh,
and he spills ketchup, and you can see the RMF
that
embroidery.
might be a good segue into my RMF question. So, like, our each story is titled something about RMF, right? It's wait, I'm gonna get this wrong. RMF, the death of RMF. RMF is flying. and RMF eats the sandwich. So, I mean, what do we make of this? I know PT has some sort of like extra contextual information that will kind of illuminate this a little bit, but like when you were watching the movie, what did you think the purpose of RMF was? Like why is that character, is it just a way to tie the three stories together, like, or does it have some other meaning?
I have no answer to this. I'm gonna go PT.
Well, what I will say, I don't really have extensive. That there's an article that we could link in the show notes if people find it worthwhile in Variety. That's Yorgos talking about it, but he's basically just like, oh, there should be like one person that's in each of these, like that keeps it connected, and the idea that there's like he thinks that person's presence is important in order to sort of show how they're intertwined, but he says like he leaves it open for people to interpret what it may mean. Like to me, it says that like he's there in each story as an agent in various ways of the dominant power structure, the dominant power thing in each one, where he's a person who has agreed to be murdered to show the obedience of someone to for Raymond in the first one. He's flying in either having rescued someone or bringing in a sleeper agent of some insidious duplicate, depending on the interpretation you want to have in the second one. And then, not intentionally, but he is by chance chosen to be the proof of a miracle in the third one for the cult, which is part of the fascination, not part of the thing in the third one that I think is fascinating, is that it's this crazy weird cult that has this like Hong Chow licks you to see if you're pure test strategy, and they have to leave tears in a big jug of water, and that's the only water you can consume. But then they're also right about this prophecy because they did follow it and find someone who can bring people back to life. So they were also like correct, and so they did have this power to predict that, and he's a part of that too. So I think that's like obvious to say, and maybe there's more to it, or maybe it is just isn't this funny that like and then the two guys, John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson, end up in the coffee shop from the opening scene. Like, isn't that fun? Like, it's just an interconnection of separate stories to make a movie. But that's what I was thinking. It's just like he's this agent that is crucial. You need him in each of the stories, or else the story can't continue.
Yeah, to me, he felt a little just outside of what was happening in the story, even though he's participating in it. You know what I mean? Almost like he's a passive observer, or like this godlike figure almost, who's like coming down and being like, okay, like I'm watching everybody by being this like random guy in each of these stories. It kind of felt something like that, almost like a Greek chorus or an oracle, even though like he doesn't do anything that those things do in Greek plays, but like, you know what I mean? Like something like that, some sort of external figure that is in the mix, but is ultimately more omniscient than everyone else or something.
Mm-hmm. This is a very weird thing, and I don't know if this is going to work. So Jen, potentially cut it out. Did you ever watch Kids in the Hall back in the day, the sketch comedy show? Is this an age difference / taste?
I've heard. I mean, obviously I know what it is, but I have not seen it.
Well, they were a Canadian sketch comedy group at the time, quite funny. Yeah, Dave Foley, Mark McKinney, who's on Saturday Night Live later, and all of them are very good and talented. They had a guy who was, I think it was the first person who joined them. Just the five of them wrote, I think, the first few episodes. And then the first outside writer they brought to help them on their show was a guy named Paul Bellini. And a recurring thing was just in various sketches would be this guy naked with a towel. And he was kind of looked like a swarthy Mediterranean man. So maybe that's why I thought of him whenever I saw RMF. But like, it's just like, oh, Bellini in a towel. He's just like another, like there as well. And he's just like this omniscient figure in Kids in the Hall sketches that he would just randomly be in different places. And sometimes it would be like a focus in some way. And other times it would just be that he's just kind of there in the background. And so, yeah, this, I don't know, again, a very strange connection. I don't really know what that, making that connection in my mind means, but it's somewhat similar to, I think, what you're saying, Jen, of just like this presence, and if nothing else, of just like the interconnectedness of the world, and that there's just strange, happenstance, coincidences, Magnolia style. Yes, it did happen. There's just this guy connecting these three stories.
And it's also like a big contrast to the fact that we're getting all of these actors as different people, right? In each story, Jesse Plemons is a different person, but RMF is always RMF. So there's something to that as well. I don't know. This is not a fully formed thought, but like, yeah, it's a cool thing to think about. I like the theory about it, him being the one who is the agent of the authoritarian power. That works for me. So I just mentioned here. Watch this. Gonna be a great segue. I just mentioned all of the different actors playing all these different characters. Was there one player in the ensemble that stood out to you? Like, who was kind of the MVP of this movie for you, do you think?
Well, I already mentioned Jesse Plemons. I think he's pretty devastating in the first film and pretty devious in the second, and then doesn't have that much to do in the third. Um, but he's probably he's the MVP for me. But that's sort of an easy answer because he has the central role really in two of the three. Um, I really enjoyed Hong Chow. I've always enjoyed Hong Chow. I think that she always comes off as kind of like the smartest person in the room, even when she has like a really small part. But one thing I really liked in the third film was the third vignette or whatever the story was that the cult had two leaders and they seemed to have sort of equal importance, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting because normally that's not how cults work. And um and uh so I was glad because she didn't have as much to do in the first two. So I really it was the juiciest role for her, and she really brought a lot to it. So those two are probably my top ones. How about you, Jen?
I mean, yeah, it's hard not to go with. Those are both really good ones. I'm gonna shout out Willem Dafoe
Hmm.
because I think he has in some ways, by nature of the character he plays in each of these stories, has the least to do overtly, but has to have like a very strong presence nonetheless. And I feel like that's hard to do in three different ways. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like he plays three very different characters, even though he's kind of like the old guy character in each of the stories. You know what I mean? Like, he still makes a lot out of it. I mean, the first one, he is just so good at being kind of like so matter of fact and like inhabiting this position of power so well. And then, but in the third movie, he's and arguably he's doing the same thing as a cult leader, but at the same time, his personality is entirely different, right? Like he's doing it through kindness rather than, I mean, I guess that's it's part of the title of the
Kind
movie,
of.
but like he's doing it as this more kind of magnanimous sort of like approach of like he's nurturing and kind of like, oh, like everyone is special and like I love everyone, and right, as opposed to like it's just such a stark contrast to me. His hair and makeup also in the third one, immaculate, like so good.
We gotta talk about the drip. The Willem Dafoe outfits in each of these movies, each of these stories was incredible. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have hit the top ones. It's funny that I guess I'll honorably mention Emma Stone, the most famous and not the most centered, because Jesse Plemons is the most centered, but the most centered in terms of the conceptual, like she produced this and is the name behind this for the most part, probably in terms of getting anyone to write a check to make this movie is because of Emma Stone. So I'm going to shout out Margaret Qualley, who is still feels quite young. I actually don't. I'm not certain currently. I think she's in her late 20s, but she's always good. I always enjoy when she's around, but I like the fact that she could hang with everyone that was just mentioned. and felt just like, yeah, she's in here, she's a part of it. That was very impressive for me, and didn't necessarily have the same range asked of her as Willem Dafoe, but was even within the third story was two different quite different characters, and I thought that she did a really good job. But I mean, yeah, I think if we're awarding an MVP, I think it's pretty clearly Plemons. Like he's
that's the
the
thing.
runaway from this movie.
She's Margaret Qualley is 29. Also,
Yeah.
apparently the daughter of Andy McDowell. Did either of you know that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she did that miniseries where Andy McDowell plays her mom.
Oh.
I think she
I
was
know
like,
because almost all the Manson girls in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are the children of someone famous. Like that was an intentional
interesting.
casting choice. Maya Hawke,
That makes sense.
and Kevin Smith's daughter, and there's a couple other. Lena Dunham, I mean, is famous on her own, of course, but has a famous artist dad.
I really liked Margaret Qualley as I don't know if we could say evil twin, but the twin in the third story.
Mm-hmm.
The twin who's very willing to sacrifice herself.
Yes.
But I think under the assumption
that her sister will bring her back to life.
Yeah. And then she just does it because
she doesn't have time.
This is so terrible and funny. But she's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. But also like that she felt like she had to do that to make the profile of the prophecy true. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't want to keep pushing back on Antonio's "I didn't laugh once" comment in his Letterboxd review, but I also laughed when she left the house clearly to jump into the pool and kill herself. Just though she's just sort of like, oh, there's drinks here, there's drinks over there, and then like just leaves, and you're like, where she's going. Like that.
The second I saw her in the swimsuit, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, and then very minor, but in the first one when Jesse Plemons, Robert, goes to see Raymond. And to try to be like, I can't do this, like I will not. And there's the like, come in and say it, but sit down. And it's like, actually, no, that doesn't work. Come in again and stand up. And they go this whole like control thing about how he tells the news. And then Willem Dafoe stands up and he's just wearing cargo shorts and like knee-high socks.
Yes.
Something about that, like that, the whole theater cackled with that.
So, yeah, that was very funny.
I'm sorry, Antonio. This was funny. This is a funny movie. Get in the game.
All right.
All right, so we've actually mentioned several terms throughout. I'm moving us into rhetorical situation. I think we've mentioned parable. I think I said allegory. And so like we've mentioned those terms casually in sort of describing what's going on. Morality tale, I think, is what we've used also. Like I think I brought that up. So I want to move us into a rhetorical situation to discuss like what is this movie? Like what can we call this? So rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode to make connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. So the big one that came up for me is I'm like, all these terms oftentimes to me seem interchangeable. So on the list I had in our doc is parable, allegory, fable, myth. We can add morality tale because we talked about it a bunch. So, I mean, do any of you know the differences between all those things? Or like, what are we, and why is it that this anthology film is very clearly evoking something like that? So those are two different questions. So you can take either one.
When I saw this in the doc, I really hoped that what it meant was you had an answer for what the difference is between those terms, because I did no work to look that up or really think about it.
Well, I did I at least looked up the dictionary definitions.
Webster's defines.
Yeah, Webster's defines. And so, I mean, so okay, well, let's start with parable, right? So parable, the dictionary definition was like a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. And so I thought this one was out because these are a lot of things that wasn't simple to me. So, and when you think of like parables, I think of like, I don't know, like very, very like things that you tell children to sort of explain basic concepts of morality, right? And this seems like it's something else, like or something beyond that. Allegory said story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. This is the one that I thought was probably the closest, because I think that it's a movie that invites you, wants you to engage with it, to figure out both the 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 lesson, or not, maybe the lesson. I think lesson is actually probably the wrong word, but to draw the connections, and to think about and to live in these worlds and to connect them. It's like it wants you to do that. You have to do that, right? Yeah, I don't think you can come away without like trying to figure out, even whether you like it or you don't like it. You're just like, well, what was this? What was this for, right? And there's a kind of like achievement in that, again, regardless of whether it ultimately resonates with you or not. It's you can't not think about it, I think, both while you're watching it and certainly afterwards. Um, so that's probably the one that I would pick. Um, Fable, I don't know, just to finish off the dictionary definitions, was like a short story, typically with animals as characters, conveying a moral. And I'm just this is just of nothing, but like I remember one of the first time I ever taught was actually at my old high school. I was about to go to law school, and they hired me in the summer before I started law school to teach summer school to like kids who failed English. um, and I remember that the teacher who was supposed to mentor me and guide me, I asked her like, "Well, what should I do? Like, I need to build a syllabus." Like, she said, "Well, my first unit is on animals as protagonists," and this was high school. So as soon as she said that, I was just like, I just stopped listening to everything she said because I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, fable didn't seem quite right. And then myth, a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. So supernatural beings or events, there's something sort of supernatural, I feel like, certainly in the third, arguably in the second, maybe the first. Um, First, I'm not sure. So this one maybe, but it doesn't seem. Allegory seemed the closest, right? I don't know. What did you all think? What was your intuitions, Jen? What about you?
Well, so what I'm realizing now, looking at this list and listening to your definitions, is that the thing that all of these terms have in common
Mhm.
is the abstraction, right? Where it's like, one of Aesop's fables is not really about a lion and a mouse or a fox and a whatever, right? Like that's a stand-in for another thing we're supposed to be thinking about and applying to our own lives and our own society, right? Myth is the same thing, right? Like myth famously is like, everyone has this theory of universalism where it's like every culture independently of each other have come up with similar stories, right? Because they help us project and deal with and process the same fears and anxieties and cultural sort of mores and stuff like that through the an abstracted story, right? It's not about the characters in the myth. It's about what the myth represents, right? Or like the feelings that the myth is sort of working out, or the morality that's working out. So that's why I feel like I want to find one of these terms to apply to this movie, because it's so clearly like each of these three stories, the characters in them, it's not about that they are real people doing real things to each other, right? It's abstracted enough, it's kind of delivered in this monotone way enough that it's clearly supposed to be about something else. Right? So that I don't yeah, so I would have a hard time picking one of these things off this list, but that's kind of my conclusion, is that like it's going to be about what we are trying to work out through these stories rather than the stories themselves.
Right.
PT, what do you think?
I think that's correct. I think that like it holds meaning. The stories are commentary on something wider and deeper, and I think that is a through line through all the definitions. Two things that I want to say is I did when I did do a little bit looking around, not into the definitions of these words, but of like, was there anything from the filmmakers about this? And I kept seeing the phrase describing this movie as a three an anthology of 3 dark fables. And the phrase was repeated often enough that I was like, that must have been in a press release, because it's in a bunch of the like just stuff that's out there for this, both just like announcing that it's coming out, reviews of the movie, interviews, like introducing interviews, but I could never find it attributed to anyone. I couldn't find that like, Yorgos Lanthimos or Emma Stone or Jesse Plemons said these were fables. But that was the word that really like was tied to it, at least promotionally. But that could just be a marketing person thought fables was the term most likely to get people to go into the theaters. They got a focus group together and they looked at all these words, and fables tested the most positively. So, but I will just put that in as a data point. And the other thing that I will say, just to potentially add to the list, I don't think that this necessarily is going to stay on the list for too long. But I did see some commentary online, and I'm sorry that I don't remember where it was, calling these fairy tales instead of all of these. And it was specifically around what we have already kind of wrestled with as the most difficult component, which is the final section of the second story. And someone, again, wherever I read this, the person was like, well, it's classic fairy tale rules of the stranger has come in and is trying to cook food, and if you eat the food, you will fall under their power, and he keeps not eating it. Like they're in this sort of battle.
It is a big deal throughout the whole story.
Because when she first eat? Right, and when she first comes in, the cat like hisses at her as if it's something different, and then he's like, well, I fed the cat your thumb, and then the cat is all lovey-dovey from that point on. And then like coinciding with that is, if you ask like this stranger a request, they have to abide by it, which is we'll cut off your thumb and serve it to me. Like, she has to do that. Cut out your liver, she has to do that. And so it's like this sort of, and I don't know if there's a specific fairy tale they had in mind with this, but but it had that sort of a logic. Again, I don't know if that carries over. I couldn't see connections into the other ones, but I thought that was interesting. So I'm putting that on the board, and slyly trying to not come to any conclusion about the list we actually have and what term I want to use.
I'm thinking maybe that's why he ends up licking that the Joe Alwyn character's wound like a dog. Because initially I was like, this is inconsistent, because
do you mean because dogs are running society?
Well, no, exactly. Like, well, I was like, well, if Liz is the one who has now become like a dog, right? Because she's craving meat, and she explains that she wants to eat chocolate when she's never liked chocolate before, because that's the only thing dogs don't eat, and that was what was available on the island, which I loved as an explanation. By the way, but then I remember it really threw me when I was like, well, why is he acting like a dog? He's very purposely trying not to get kind of like drawn into her world, right? Or like he's rejecting her behavior. And so now maybe because he does eat something at some point, right? From that she cooks, just not. No. Okay.
I think he only eats something that someone else prepared. Like, isn't that like, didn't the people bring over the food? Like his partner and her and his wife brought over food when Emma Stone's back. I think. I could be wrong.
No, you're probably right. But again, it's not really about. So it's interesting that we're kind of debating these questions about what actually is happening, because I feel like the point is not that at all, and the point is like, aren't we all animals? Like, I feel like at the end of the day, that's like the society being run by dogs is sort of supposed to be a mirror, like a harsh mirror image of our own society. Like, we're not actually that different than the least kind dogs.
We are the planet of the apes. That's the takeaway. So I do want to dip into something that I found when I was looking around. That again, I don't think is the answer, but when we keep saying about like, and it's a fable that means something, and it's a parable that's all referring to something. There is a sort of beyond the kind of discussions of power that we've already had. I found this thing that was an interesting kind of grand unifying theory for this movie, and it's coming from an author who at least claims some expertise that I can't necessarily speak to, but like felt pretty convincing for me. So again, I put it in the document. We can link it in the show notes. It's from a website called Films Fatale. And it was an article written by, and I apologize again to our Greek friends if I'm mispronouncing their name, Andreas Babiolakis. Yes, Babiolakis, I believe. And their sort of take on this is either like, as someone who is Greek and someone who grew up Greek Orthodox, who's no longer Greek Orthodox, this movie is about the Greek Orthodox Church and the sort of like falling away from that and being a lapsed member of that church, and how, you know, that as a further representation of sort of just like crumbling problems in Greek society, as a member of the Greek weird wave, and that each of the stories is in order: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So Raymond, obviously the boss, being the father, giving like an Abraham-esque, you must kill this person I've told you to kill order, except in this version it's like the killing happens and he's like, great, I'm super happy about that. And then in the second one, it's the person who is brought down from the sky by RMF, is Jesus. So Emma Stone is Jesus, and has to be tortured, has to be killed, and only through death, wounds in both the hand and in the side, can they come back and actually be the
Oh.
person that you want to be around. And then the third one is the Holy Spirit, that beyond that story, the Holy Spirit is around in all of us and will has the possibility to give eternal life, which is the sort of purity and the cult and going off and finding, finding some way to do that. And within this construct, they were attributing it to someone else. They had an idea of what RMF could mean, which was redemption, manipulation, and faith. And so like that could be what RMF means. Maybe not necessarily like that's who that person means, but just that's what the letters mean. And so that all of this is kind of a like, oh, this is the story. These are the kind of stories we've been told when we grow up in a church. And I'm not Greek Orthodox, so I don't necessarily know that, but I was raised in a Catholic church, which is, there was a schism. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of alignment in terms of the core narratives, and that it's like, yeah, like we get these stories and like they're ingrained in us for so long, we think they're fine. What if we told them to you like this? Like, wouldn't you think that's really messed up? And this is not how society should be run. And so that's kind of the idea that is underpinning all of this. So again, I don't know that that's the answer, but that felt like an interesting read that like had enough there that I want to put out there. And again, maybe we can link to this person's deeper version of what I just said.
Yeah, I think we definitely should. I really like this. It's making a lot of stuff click into place in a way that it never would have before. This review mentions Luis Buñuel, the surrealist filmmaker,
Mhm.
and I wish I had thought of that before, because yeah, there's a lot of the same themes, not necessarily with the religious context that you're talking about, but in terms of like dream logic and power and society and yeah. But anyway,
Antonio, does this seem like anything, or is
I
it
mean,
sort of?
this sounds like an incredible theory. Like this is a great paper for a novel that I'm probably not going to reread. But
Fair.
but like again, this is what I was most looking forward to talking about, right? Not because I had a lot to contribute in terms of like how to piece this together. I only had my sort of like reactions to it as a film goer and how I was sort of grappling with it. But again, like I still wanted to have the conversation. Whereas I feel like sometimes I'll walk out of a movie and I'll be like, I I doubt that there actually is anything to glean from this, or I'm going to be very skeptical of like the ways that people try to turn this into something meaningful. But this one, I had faith that there would be smarter people than I coming up with interesting ways of weaving it together, and that sounds pretty good to me, and that sounds pretty neat to me for a movie that that I found kind of baffling in a lot of ways. But again, still enjoyed like individual moments from, and still um, I did want to ask one thing though about there were a couple of other recurring things throughout that I wanted to ask. Did every I think that the first two, but I wasn't sure if the third or maybe two of the three dealt with characters talking about their dreams, right? So for sure we've already talked about the dog dream, but there was another sequence, at least one, but maybe all three.
All three. But
Okay,
this is
all three.
something I want to talk about too,
Yeah.
because the third one, the dream sequence was Emma Stone, and I don't have the Wikipedia page up now, so I'm going back to Emma Stone. Emma Stone saying, "I had a dream that I saw the face of the person we're looking for. I was at the
Oh, right.
bottom of a
Oh, that's
pool,
great.
and my hair was stuck in the
Right.
drain, and there were these two synchronized swimmers. One of them came down to save me. So pool, the swimmer, and then like when the Margaret Qualley comes up to them, she's like, "That's the face I saw in the dream," and they're like, and Margaret Qualley's like, "Yeah, my sister's the person you're looking for." So there's that dream, which is interesting. There was the dog dream, of course, which we all know and love. And then there was the first one. The dream was it in black and white. It was Jesse Plemons' Robert waiting, like lurking in a parking garage on one of the ramps, waiting for Raymond to pull in. And then like running up to him and just being like, "I want to talk to you," and like doing like this sort of like having a failed attempt to like a plea for his forgiveness. And then like he wakes, I feel like it shows him waking up and that he's like in the squalor of no one's taking care of him, no one's telling him what to do, pizza boxes and just whatever trash all around him. Then the next scene is basically that exact thing happening, and he's like, "I saw this happen in a dream," but like it doesn't go any better. He doesn't learn anything from it. Like there's no improvement. It is exactly as he foresaw it, which made me wonder, looking back, is the idea that just this character doesn't know how to learn anything unless someone tells him what to do? Like that's part of his, that everything else we've said about like, what do you recommend I get for my beverage? Like he just needs someone to control him? Or is the implication that everything that is foreseen in a dream in the other stories is true? Like because like that happened the way he saw it in a dream, does that mean that everything happened the way they saw it in the pool dream? And also, which is kind of true because it is the Margaret Qualley and it is pool related, how they end up finding her and how the prophecy is fulfilled. But then what does that say about the dogs, like and the dog society? There's
I mean,
really
I would go
dogs.
with "We Are the Dogs,"
Okay, I like
right?
that.
Like I think that, I don't know, that seems to be, at least in the abstract, that seems to be the conclusion we're supposed to draw. But yeah, maybe. Yeah, I want to lean towards the dog ruled society was real. I like it better if that's true. um, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna admit, I did not realize that the scenes you described in the first story were dreams. I didn't clock that.
Yeah, well, it's just because it's
I
black
just
and
thought he
white.
kept doing it over and over again. It was being really annoying.
Right. It's just because it's black and white, and then it's the dreams later are also black and white.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just missed. I think at that point
Right.
I hadn't learned black and white meant dreams, so
Right.
I was just kind of like, "Oh, interesting. We're now in black and white." And he's doing this. I did like how he like crouches in the parking garage so no one can see him.
Right. But also like, and also like this guy who he's like invested his entire life in, like doesn't have a fancy executive spot. He's on like at least the second floor in like just like a generic crappy parking structure. Like that could be a USC parking structure. Like there's no sort of like fancy, like you pull
Yeah.
up in front of your building or you get a driver to bring you in. Like he's just some like, looks like a middle management guy. Like, and you'd let him control your whole life.
There is something in each of the stories that, again, like abstracts but echoes the dynamic and actual romantic relationships between people, right? So like the first one, it's like when people get in relationships, they change a lot of the time because they're trying to please the other person. The other person's trying to mold them into something that they're not, right? That's the thing that we see in other stories and in real life. And then the second one, it really feels like that it's really dealing with two things. One, abusive relationships, because there's a lot of the things about like the two sides of the story. Each of the characters in the relationship are talking to other people about the relationship and trying to establish that the other person's crazy, right? And there's also the sort of like people grow apart and they can't accept it. Like this also could be kind of a model for that. Or if they're if you're in an abusive relationship, it's sort of this idea that like you think you're the one to blame, but it's really the other person's fault. Like there's a lot of like complicated relationship stuff. And then the third one obviously is like people blinded by their devotion to someone that they love so much that they're willing to do all this stuff
Right.
for them. How much do you do to prove your love? Shout out, by the way, to Margaret Qualley playing and singing really poorly How Deep Is Your Love in the first one.
Yes. And also bring in the abusive husband, or the rapist husband in the third one as well, who also would, I am sure, on some level, would try to make the argument of like, I love my wife and I just want her to be back, so I'm going to drug her and have sex with her, like, to win her back, which is crazy. Like, crazy and wrong. Like, let's just put that out there. Let's make it clear.
Yeah, and the title of the movie is Kinds of Kindness. You can interpret that in two ways. Either it's like it's only sort of kindness, or kindness and love only in name, right? But it's actually something much darker. Or it's sort of like these are the different kinds of kindness. Like these are all the ways in which we think that we love other people, but instead it's really this dark and twisted, horrible thing. Really uplifting. Sure.
So I think that I certainly felt like I came in the most positive on this, but I want to ask a critical question of the movie. We had this long conversation at recording time, almost an hour and a half, and I feel like we've pulled a lot of threads and found a lot of like things that are in there and possible readings and all of that. The fact that none of that's like super obvious, or like you could leave and be kind of like, well, I knew that was about all of that. Does that like it hints at the depth, and it says, okay, maybe there's something there, but does that mean the movie's not successful if like it takes so long to unwrap all of this? Or no, I don't know, or the alternative, I guess, of like sometimes it's hard to, and you got to take time to interpret it, and sometimes you don't want to because you didn't care for it, and sometimes you do it and you're happy you did. But I don't know, like, does the fact that we've been talking about this like without necessarily feeling like, and it was a satisfying thing to experience, at least for 2/3 of us in the moment, is that a problem? Inherently a problem?
I mean, I feel, yeah, it's a problem. I because again, like this is, I think it's an, I think it's great that we have like a unifying theme, and that you know that we've cobbled it together. We've discovered like the essay that will unlock it for us. Um, but as I said earlier, I'm probably not gonna revisit it. I mean, maybe there's a tiny part of me, maybe like years from now, knowing all of this, that would want that would make me want to like put it to the test, maybe. Um, but part of it is also like it wasn't pleasant. Like, as interesting as it was like a kind of, it was an unpleasant world, to be in, and sometimes we have to be in unpleasant worlds, like movies invite us into unpleasant worlds because it wants us to deal with unpleasant realities, right? Like, Zone of Interest is not a pleasant movie to watch, but, like, it's saying something important that, that and doing it in an interesting way. Um, this is doing things in an interesting way, but, I don't know, but is so sort of, like, inaccessible, um, at least on first view, that I don't know that I'm gonna go back to it, because it was both it was both difficult, and not super fun. Maybe if I'd found it as funny as you, and like senses of humor are gonna like differ, right? And like I typically like dark comedies a lot. But this didn't work for me on that level. So that probably moves it out of the realm of something that I'm gonna revisit. How about you, Jen?
So I think this movie is good art, not a great movie. Because the fact that we're able to sort of potentially interpret this and the way that we have been, and kind of pull all these threads, pick up on all these things is good. But at the end of the day, I need more in there to, at the end, to be like, yes, I got it. You know what I mean? And like in the moment. And because I feel like, we talked about this earlier, the monologue, that the dog monologue. I remember in that second story when Emma Stone's character Liz is like going, and it's one of the actual few true monologues, right? Where she talks about like, well, then they did this and then we did this, and she's telling this whole other story. And in that moment, I was like, I need this, but in a way that lets me point to it and be like, there it is, right? That's what this movie's about. But it doesn't. It just talks about weird dogs not eating chocolate. Like, then it doesn't quite like go anywhere else in a way that I just like. And if the three of us are kind of really searching for meaning, and we ultimately get lots of meaning in a rewarding way from this conversation, but that, what about the normies? I said it. You know what I mean? Like what about other people sitting in the theater walking out being like, well, that was weird, right? Like, and I think this is a classic struggle that art has all the time, right? Like the more abstract, the kind of more implicit, maybe the more artful in some ways, because it's like juicier and kind of invites more interpretation, but at the same time, is it achieving its goals? Maybe it doesn't have to have goals. Maybe that's me placing that on this movie, but like, you know what I mean? Like, and all I was asking for was like 2 or 3% more direction. Like I said earlier, that's all I needed. Just a little bit more. And I think it could have stuck together a little bit better.
Your normies comment reminded me of something I may have said on the show before, that the first time I saw Eyes Wide Shut opening night at the Showcase Cinemas in Revere at a like 9:30 p.m. showing, when it ended, a guy stood up behind me and goes, "Well, that sucked." And that's my concept of like a normie seeing a difficult movie that doesn't immediately spell everything out. So I assume there are many people seeing Kinds of Kindness and saying, well, that sucked at the end. I think that in the end, I got more of connective tissue in the moment than you guys did, which doesn't mean I did it better or smarter or whatever. Or maybe it's just like I was, just because I was enjoying it more, or I was generating my own connective tissue like in the moment, to see like stuff that either wasn't there or that there there were gaps that I was filling in. Like I can't attest to that. I felt like I left feeling like, yeah, that was cohesive. Like that was 3 stories intertwined about power and control that makes sense to me, and was kind of surprised to see the not just here, but the general response be like, these don't connect or make any sense together. Like they did make sense to me in the moment. But I think the fact that so few people, not so many people didn't see that, is maybe a problem, and probably a problem that Yorgos Lanthimos doesn't care about. I was just like, I did the thing I wanted to do, and if you got it, you got it, and if you don't, you don't. And I don't know if this religious, Father, Son, Holy Spirit theory is true. Maybe it is something that if you have this particular background, you would be like, I 100% know. P.S. One of the things in that story is one of the things in that article, to go back to it earlier, is that the car is purple because that's the robes that are worn during Easter. Is purple for the promise of eternal life. So and parentheses, but that like, if you need to go and read an article, I think that it's potential that if you have to go and read an article for it something to make sense, that's a problem for any movie. So yeah, I understand that if people didn't like it or didn't feel as connected to it, I guess.
I mean, at the end of the day, I still am glad I saw it, and I think I left the theater being like, oh, Yorgos.
Yeah, to contrast a point for Antonio, and I'm not trying to beat up on Antonio. I apologize if
okay.
I'm being antagonistic, but like I totally could see myself being like, oh, this is on Netflix. Like I've got 45 minutes. I'm going to watch part 3, or I'm just going to watch through part 1. I don't know when's the next time I'll sit down and be like, I want to spend 2 hours and 40 minutes with these 3 stories together. But it feels like a little sampler pack that I would dip into from time to time, at least the first and the third.
All right, I think we need to close this out with a quick Oscar watch. What do we think? Does this have any chances at the Oscars? So the big question is, and we had already asked this about Poor Things, and it went really well, but is this movie too weird for the Academy?
Ultimately, yes, is my thought. But there's some capital that's been built up from some of these people, and we do not know how strong the rest of the year is going to be. So I have a descending order of possibilities. I think, like The Lobster, this could get a screenplay nomination because there's 10 spots, and folks could be like, Yorgos, yes, let's throw up something. And then Jesse Plemons, an actor, I think, again, heavily dependent on the context, but currently feels like he would be in the top 3 right now. Could get pushed out later. This movie could get forgotten down the road. I kind of think cinematography, I thought that like it looked really good, and Robbie Ryan, like people like him and his work, and that could be something there. Emma Stone, just because like Emma Stone's Emma Stone in supporting, I think that would be a supporting nomination.
We should give a shout out to Greg's take that he passed along.
Yes.
To us, that he felt like this was Emma Stone, that this year's Oscars is going to be Emma Stone versus Lily Gladstone all over again, and he's mad. He's mad. I'm not getting the quote right, but he was like, "I'm mad already."
Well, I mean, I know. I think it was that he saw the new Lily Gladstone movie. Is it Fancy
right? He saw
Dance?
Fancy Dance,
and then he saw this, and he was like, he's mad that once again Lily Gladstone has the better performance, but Emma Stone might get more things. I think you should think of it like Rocky 2, of like it's the rematch, but now maybe the champ we want is going to win. But I don't think either are getting nominated. And then I had like costume or production or editing, but I don't think it would actually get any of those. But if things get real dark down in the technical categories, maybe they'd be like, I don't know, look at all these weird costumes. Sure. I'm sure there'll be enough sci-fi or old-timey movies with old-timey costumes to keep this out of that. But that's what I was thinking. Antonio, is there anything else you were considering?
I don't think that the movie is enough of like has enough of a broad appeal and isn't enough of like a spectacle for it to get into the technical categories as much. So I only had screenplay and Plemons as well. Those are the only 2 that I thought were possibilities. Um, and again, I do think it's really weird. It's a really strange movie. I do think it's more inaccessible than Poor Things or The Favorite. Um, but but I also agree with PT. You can't deny that the record. And I had forgotten that The Lobster got nominated. So if The Lobster got nominated, I'll say this about The Lobster. I actually didn't finish it. um, so I finished this one. I mean, I went to the theater for this one, so and we were going to talk about it. So I was gonna finish it regardless. But I think I did enjoy this more than The Lobster. So yeah, I go screenplay and actor. How about you, Jen?
I think this gets bupkis, and that's mainly because it's an anthology film, and we've made the comparison to French Dispatch at least twice now, and that got 0 Oscar nominations. And I think it could have gotten, had it not been for this bias against anthology films, could have gotten the screenplay, could have gotten, you know what I mean, could have gotten some of the similar awards that you're talking about. I think if anything, Jesse Plemons, Civil War bump, or other vice versa, right? Like I think, and with the can win, I think I remember a lot of people reacting to that news, being like, "Oh," like so I think if people just really want to give Jesse Plemons a nomination, I think that can happen, but that's about it. I don't know if it goes any further than that.
Was the French Dispatch shutout anti-anthology bias or is it anti-Wes Anderson bias? Because Wes Anderson never gets the respect he deserves. This is, I'm
Well,
standing
I
in
mean,
for
Grand
Greg.
Budapest.
Sure, but Wes Anderson didn't win anything. Like, Wes Anderson didn't win anything with those. He got the below the lines, but he didn't get stuff. I think it's fair. And this is not because this is a hype draft rostered movie for me. So I will say that it's possible that there's also folks that are just like, I are maybe more in the Antonio, and I believe I can speak in his absence Greg mold of like, I don't know about this guy. Like, okay, like let's chill out with Yorgos. It's fine. Because Poor Things just had one more above the line win than Grand Budapest, but like maybe that was a Grand Budapest type thing of like, okay, we did it. Like we did this guy, we got his things. He has his flowers, his movie won stuff. Let's move on and we'll look at other people instead. But Dogtooth was nominated for best foreign language movie or best whatever it was called then, best international feature. So I mean, he's been around for a minute in the conversation. So there's the possibility of that, like he gets the sort of, I guess, yeah, especially in a year where again we don't know what's going to happen. Like maybe those, and I think Antonio's right with those two, that it would be screenplay and actor. I don't think it would be anything beyond that, but it's certainly possible. It just like enough good stuff comes out that it just falls away. And at the end of the year, everyone's like, hey, remember Jesse Plemons? Like we all loved him then. Like maybe he'll get like some snub talk when everyone forgets him. But that may be it. That may be the end.
I mean, he is Oscar bound eventually.
Yeah. I mean,
it just really just feel like a matter of time for him.
Everyone was pumped when he got nominated for Power of the Dog. So like it's yeah.
And people even thought he would pop up for Killers of the Flower Moon, right?
Could be. They thought maybe until they saw the movie and he showed up like 20 minutes before it ended. Said with all due respect.
All right. I think we have been kind to this movie.
Kind of.
Despite our kind. So yeah, thank you both for helping me unpack this. I think I understand. This is always the dream. Is I feel like I understand it a lot better than I did before we started talking about it. So that's always really satisfying. Antonio, where can people find you? And I know there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Elefano, AELEFANO PT. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Letterboxd as well at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can also follow the show there at LTR Pod, or follow the show on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review in both of those places. You can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, maybe wherever you're listening to us right now. Just hit that subscribe button, maybe leave us a review, maybe leave us a rating. That would be lovely. And Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Who let the dogs out?
Good night.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel. My kids just discovered that song today.
Woof woof. Oh no.
I don't know what Circle of Hell that is, but it's
It's fourth. It's got to be fourth or fifth.
It's Alexa, play Who Let the Dogs Out. Pause. Alexa, put on repeat.
Oh, no.
That was my day today.
I mean, it sounds like they need to watch Kinds of Kindness now.
It was cute for like 5
as a
seconds.
punishment.
And I was like, oh, this is so funny. They like the song. And then I was like, oh no. Anyway, yeah. So I feel like that would have the dogs driving in the car. That would have been easy needle drop.
Yeah, that would have been good. Maybe God forbid they be too obvious. One thing I wrote in a recent Letterboxd review, very tangentially related to this movie, is that watching a late era, like final years Philip Seymour Hoffman performance, something about what he was doing, I was like, "What? It sucks that we never got to the point where Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jesse Plemons, and Matt Damon played brothers." Like, there should have been some movie where they were like three family members who had to come back and just be like irascibly grumpy with each other, and deal with like some family trauma together. Like, it frustrates me. So anyway, I think Jesse Plemons should win an Oscar.
I'm sure with the magic of AI that could happen.
I don't like that. I don't like what you just said.